something like that. Physician found fluid behind the right tympanic membrane and prescribed a decongestant. What should be behind the right tympanic membrane? All right, all plexuses put away now and focus on the lecture. Yeah, Jonathan, you too. Putting it down now. We'll go back and focus on what we're supposed to be focusing on. So, what should be behind the right ear? Air, right? So, fluid in the middle ear, a decongestant. All right, sounds good. The hearing did not improve. 2 months later, she had reduced coordination in her right hand. Now, the reduced coordination is a neurological symptom, and the hearing cannot be assumed now to just be a decongestant problem. So, first thing, did the doctor do the right thing initially, prescribing a decongestant? Did the doctor do the right thing initially? Yes. Absolutely he did. She only had hearing loss and she had the fluid. It was a logical thing, absolutely. You're not going to run a full neuro exam and MRI based on that. Until the coordination popped into play, now we've got to change things around. Vision, pupils, extraocular movements are normal. What is that telling me? If vision is normal, then cranial nerve 2 is vision, right? Okay, if you don't want to participate, I'll take the point away. How does that sound? All right, we're going to get into this now. Yes, we are. So, if extraocular movements are normal, then that implies that 3, 4, and 6 are good, right? So this is telling us the lesion is probably not where? Midbrain would be unlikely at this point, right? We touch the right cornea and we can't get either eye to blink. But when we touch the left eye, they both blink. So what is that telling us? It's got to be right 5, right? If both eyes blink, the 7s are working. So I touch one eye, you don't get blinking. I touch the other eye, they both blink. It's got to be a sensory problem. So right 5. So what do we got now? We've got right 5. We have right coordination problems. Now it's starting to paint a picture, isn't it? Did not taste salt or sugar well on the anterior part of her tongue. What does that involve? 7, right? Absolutely. What part of 7? What nerve?
Inner.
Tympani would be a logical choice here, right? But notice there's no weakness of her right facial muscles. Is it possible to lose taste for 7 and not motor? Why not, right? Not sure. Okay. But that also is the right side. So now we got some right 7, right 5, right coordination. Sensory neural hearing loss on the right side. Oh, what does that mean? What did sensory neural imply? As opposed to conductive. Conductive was an outer or middle ear problem, right? Wax buildup, tympanic membrane, remember the whole Weber's thing, they block your ear, that kind of deal. Sensory neural is a nerve problem. 8, vestibular, cochlear nuclei, something like that. Okay, now I got no problem with that because it's on the right side. Rest of the cranial nerve exam was normal, so that puts it out of what location? Can't be the medulla. Right? We have no dysphagia, dysarthria, any of that stuff. Most likely. Most likely. Finger to nose test, moderate ataxia in the right arm, problems on the right side, coordination issues, whatever. So let's recap what we got, right? Right 5, right 7, at least sensory. Right 8, it's starting to look like the pons very much, isn't it? And how do we account for the coordination stuff? Middle peduncle, pontine nuclei, all that stuff, right? That works for me just fine. What symptoms do we not have so far? There are no corticospinal, no corticobulbar issues, right? Is there a problem with 6? Do we have any dorsal column stuff? So, what are my likely options here for a syndrome? Lateral inferior pontine would account for all these symptoms, except that this isn't a what problem? It's not vascular, right? It's progressive. So, did a tumor do that? Sure, it's a tumor pressing on the side of the pons. Why not, right? Totally reasonable. But, this woman has a particular of symptoms. Starts off with hearing and moves on to 5 and 7. And that's a very classic profile for the type of tumor that this woman has. And what she has is called, as we'll see in a moment, it's an acoustic neuroma. All right, an acoustic neuroma or schwannoma, it's the same thing. What's unusual about an acoustic neuroma is, well, we'll get back to that in a second as we know what the problem is with her. So what side is the tumor on? It has to be on the right, right? All her symptoms are on the right, so a tumor pressing on the right side of the brainstem, the pons. That would make sense to me. Why are we only getting the tasting for 7? It just happens to work out that way in this patient. If she had facial paralysis as well, I'd be no problem. It fits in totally. It's just a bit unusual that it was only the taste part, but it can certainly be both. All right, so don't need to look at that picture then. Right side cerebellar symptoms, absolutely. We know it all's got to be on your cerebellar is always ipsilateral except for the red nucleus. So right side coordination, right side problem. That's backed up by right 8, right 7, and right 5. No question, this thing's got to be on the right side. Also, though, got to be progressive. The tumor would make sense. So where is my lesion going to be? We've already decided it's pretty much got to be caudal pons. But is 5 caudal pons? I mean, yes, technically, right, but it enters or exits at mid-pons, right? And what we're talking about here is a tumor pushing like this. So it's probably actually affecting 5 when it's coming out of or into the pons, right, not the actual inside. So that's why it says mid to lower pons, it's got to press on the nerves of 5. So, where is the actual problem on her condition is progressive, so it can include vascular. We don't have any evidence of bacterial infection or trauma or anything like that. 65 is older, but it's not like, you know, a foot in the grave kind of thing. So, can't go in that direction too severely. No trauma, but starts off with 8 and then includes 7 and 5. And the only thing that fits that profile is this fellow here. Okay, an acoustic neuroma or schwannoma. Remember that fellow we talked about, the cerebellopontine angle, right? A big space in CSF made by the weird connection of the pons and the cerebellum. This tumor is actually from Schwann cells. And basically these Schwann cells, just when 7 and 8 are getting myelinated, kind of look into the brain and say, oh, does that look like a nice, great big pool of CSF? And he dies right in. So this is a schwannoma. They are Schwann cells, but it's inside the CNS. And now you understand where that comes from. It's a benign tumor. So her symptoms took months and months to occur, right? That makes total sense. And not too hard to get at. You just got to do a craniotomy here, then in you go, and you take out the benign tumor. It's sitting separate from all these structures. So it's actually a fairly easy operation. The other thing you'll notice on here is the center is dark. And this is something we'll see commonly here. Most tumors have a necrotic center, dead tissue. Right? Dead tissue doesn't need blood. So, remember what the gadolinium does, right? It makes the tumor bright because the tumor takes up a lot of blood. But the middle of the tumor is going to be dark, at least most cases, because it's necrotic tissue, no blood. So it's a pretty standard picture on here, and that one's big. I don't see any ventricular enlargement or anything else, but that's how, you know, this thing grows very slowly into a big bath of fluid. It's perfect for a slow-growing tumor. Person notices a bit of hearing loss, right? If the doc didn't find the fluid in the ear, he probably would have thought it was wax buildup, flushed her ears out. So, gradual progression of symptoms would seem kind of logical. So, acoustic neuroma or schwannoma, this guy didn't die from his, he just happened to have one. You see the size of it here. That is not a small tumor. But you can also see how it's displaced the brainstem, but these arteries look great, everything else. The guy was probably having headaches, he was on the way to the hospital to get his MRI, and he was in a car accident. And that's what we ended up with, but that tumor did not kill him. So, what's the cool thing about an acoustic neuroma? The main issue on that starts with 8 and progresses to include 7 and 5. Right? So imagine this guy pushing down in the caudal pons, that's 8 and 7 first, right? And as it becomes more of a problem, it starts to affect 5. So it's a very very standard progression for an acoustic neuroma, 8, 7, and 5. And is it possible to get bilateral acoustic neuromas?
Yeah.
What condition do we have bilateral acoustic neuromas? I know I haven't actually told you. Neurofibromatosis type 2, right? NF1 has the cafe au lait and the fibromas and everything else. Really the only... Good-looking guy, you want to keep it that way. All right, what was I talking about before I got off track there?
NF2.
NF2 really only has one symptom, bilateral tumors. So what is that guy's presenting symptoms going to be? Bilateral hearing loss, right? And what do we know about bilateral hearing loss? That's kind of a rarity based on all the anatomy we've learned, right? So you think that, oh, it's only got one symptom, but it's pretty easy. Plus, they'd have been diagnosed with NF2 at some point. Okay, so that is an acoustic schwannoma or neuroma, a peripheral tumor that grows into the CNS. The cerebellopontine angle is like a big cistern. So, you know, depending on what your preference is, it's like jumping into a big bowl of gravy or beer or whatever you like. Yeah. Cream soda? All right, there we go. Okay. So that brings us to what we're talking about today, which obviously relates to that particular lecture because we're going to be talking about the hearing stuff a lot more. Olfaction, gustation, and the rest of the auditory stuff. We need to do the balance, the vestibular, all that kind of stuff, and get to the Webers and the Renees and all that kind of thing. Olfactory, what do we remember about this guy already, right? Olfactory, cranial nerve 1, does not go to the brainstem, doesn't even go to the thalamus first. Right? Second order neurons go where? Olfactory cortex, amygdala, that kind of stuff, right? So this thing is so old, you had this for so long, way before language or anything else. Well, back in the days, survival, you smell blood. Wouldn't you like your fear systems to know that right away? Because then you run like hell, right? Or toward whatever, depends on what's going on. So, it's not designed to do, oh my, what a happy little blood smell. Let me go check it out. It's, oh my God, that's blood. Let me run like hell. All right, this is old survival, that kind of stuff. Obviously, as we acquired language, it became less important, and physiologically, it changed. Right? Dogs and cats have 10 times the number of receptors you have for smell. You have 20 million, they have 200. Why doggies? Plus, they can't talk, so they got to do something, right? No, your dog can't talk. Let's not get into that. Only on Christmas Eve. We all know that, right? So, olfactory receptors. What do we know about these guys? They're bipolar along with which other cranial nerves? 1, 2, and 8, right? All use bipolar first order neurons. What else is weird about these ones? They're unmyelinated. Because what happens? We grow new ones every 2 weeks, right? Olfactory neurons regenerate. Makes them very unusual. So, there's no point in myelinating them because you got to regrow them, then myelinate them. They've only got to go this far, right through the cribriform plate. So, no reason to myelinate. When they pass through the cribriform plate, which we know is part of what bone? Ethmoid. Second order neurons are also known as mitral cells. And they're the ones whose axons will head off, right? Form the anterior commissure and all that kind of stuff. So, where do they go? Primary olfactory cortex, that was Brodmann's number 34, absolutely. And of course the amygdala, recognition of fear, that kind of thing. Primary olfactory, what do we need to talk about that guy? Hippocampus, thalamus. Are smells important for emotion and memory in that? Absolutely, right? So, I still remember my first girlfriend's perfume. Well, I don't actually remember it now. I just drew a blank on the name. She'd probably kill me if she knew, but okay, whatever. Chanel number 5, whatever. You guys will buy that, right? Just say yes. Let me off the hook here. Thank you. Okay. But yes, smells can be incredibly potent triggers of memory. Okay? And usually it's things you don't see coming, right? Like you you smell mint or something like that, and oh my God, you remember some often generalized, very powerful meaning. So yeah, smell is designed to be a good memory trigger. If you remember what blood smells like, you're not likely to be somebody's dinner. So I get that part, amygdala, hippocampus, thalamus, beautiful on that. And even the hypothalamus, right? Why? Because smell is potentially going to trigger your fight or flight response. So hypothalamus is kind of a little bit involved in sympathetic, last I checked. So all of this makes sense, right? Very old, think Nature Planet, Disney or Animal Planet channel kind of thing. That tells you what you're looking at here. So what do we need to look down on here? Big picture down on there. We have supporting cells. What do supporting cells do? They support. That one's easy. Someone's got to be in there to hold things in place and, regulate this and that. Not too concerned about those guys. But there's also basal stem cells down there, right? How can you have neurons without stem cells? So the basal stem cells will go on to become the new olfactory neurons. That makes perfect sense. What else do I see down in there? Each of the gustatory or the olfactory cells, the actual bipolar neuron, has its little hair here, right? This brown fellow here, the olfactory or Bowman's gland, secretes mucus. Mucus lines the nose. Olfactory or odorant molecules get trapped in the mucus, and then you detect them. All right? So that's why you have mucus in your nose. Cranial nerve 7, as we know, innervates the mucosal or Bowman's gland. So we got that going for us. So that's it. Axons pass through the cribriform plate. Second order mitral cells in the bulb. Some of those cross over, some of them don't, and we know where they go to. Always a great picture to remind us of the frontal impact trauma thing, right? You've got this thin little piece of bone that's got perforations in it. And smack like that, you can easily see where it's going to crack up here, and as a result, cracks in this bone, the meninges are running right above it, right? So poof, fractured bone cuts the meninges, and you get your rhinorrhea, right? Cerebral-rhinorrheal, leakage of CSF. Easy to visualize that on here. The bloody nose and the black eyes, well, that's what happens when you get smacked in the face, so no big surprise there. It's the other aspects, the more serious ones on that. Okay, so, supporting cells, support, nourishment, that kind of thing, absolutely. I said basal stem cells, about 10 days to 2 weeks for replacing these guys. So we know that, and it doesn't say it on the slide, but I mentioned it before, and then today, olfactory gland, the Bowman's gland, the mucosal gland, is a cranial nerve 7 gland. Well, that's easy to remember. 7 does lacrimation, salivation. Why not another gland in the face, right? It's doing the other ones. And also explains why some people, when they cry, get a very runny nose. 7 is just activating everything. So, yeah, isn't that pleasant? So what are we looking at here? Just a different picture, but we have a little more detail, okay? There's a little bit going on in the bulb more than we've said so far. We just said mitral cells, second order neurons, off they go. There is a glomerulus. Where have we seen that before? Kidney, right? Absolutely on that guy. And it's the same sort of idea. Just an opportunity for those guys to do their little interacting thing. So, axons from the olfactory neurons will synapse on the mitral cell. So, it's basically, because there's a structure to it, instead of just saying it's where the second order neurons are, they give it the name because it's got that similar appearance on it. But otherwise, it's just part of the olfactory bulb. Most of the olfactory bulb. Now, what we also see on here, and we talked about this before, right? Lateral inhibition. So, smell receptor for flowers is activated. It will actually inhibit the receptors around it that respond to meat or whatever else. And your visual pathways do the same thing, right? Lateral inhibition. If I suppress the other signals, but what I'm looking at is going to be stronger, right? I'll see it then. So this is a common thing. So that way you smell the rose or whatever it is you're looking at better. So lateral inhibition is just the ability of cells to inhibit cells around them, and we'll see the same thing in visual stuff later on. Is olfactory mucus important? Absolutely on that. In addition to cleaning your nose, it allows the nose to be able to access odorant molecules and all that, right? The salts, the enzymes, those are obviously important as well. And even antibodies. All right? There's some people that would argue this thing should be part of the lymphatic system in the sense that it, has an actual antibody effect. But get the idea. So antibodies are good. Why? First order neurons go right through that tiny little bone into the brain. I would like to prevent bad things from going along with them. Mucus flow is constant and replaced about every 10 minutes. Didn't know that it was constant, did you? So why are we not all going all the time? Well, except for that guy at every exam that does that the entire exam. But why aren't we doing it now? It's a lot less. I mean, it's not pouring out, that kind of thing. And it's just dripping down the back, basically. Right? So, totally cool there. Drotting on snot and ice, that would be familiar if you're from Quebec. Otherwise, what do we need to consider on here? Anterior commissure stuff that we don't already know. Well, we know it connects the amygdala. We know that it carries some neospinothalamic axons, right? So the pain transmission stuff. And again, what we see here, all right, second order neurons heading towards olfactory cortex, and some of them crossing over to do their bit on the other side, right? Inhibition, that kind of thing. Remember, it is two separate sides of the nose, right? Peanut butter test and all that kind of occlusion of a nostril. You have to test both sides. All right, what else do we notice about this part of the temporal lobe here? It's sitting right above the tentorium cerebelli. The primary olfactory cortex is the uncus, or located on the uncus. So, sometimes people with herniation issues have olfactory hallucinations, right, or auditory hallucinations, because all that stuff's sitting on the temporal lobe. Many forms of seizures start off with the temporal lobe as the initial spot, and as I said, a lot of people have a premonitory symptom. They smell or hear or taste something prior to the onset of the seizure. Well, that area of the temporal lobe becomes increasingly electrically active, and boom, you have your seizure and your hallucination. But likewise, people in a herniation situation, okay, the guy said his epidural hematoma, he's kind of out of it in the OR, and he's telling you, man, why do I keep smelling burgers? Well, that's not hallucination like he's going insane, that's the olfactory cortex giving him bad information, right? So you don't put that, patient must go to psychosis ward now. I mean, literally, you take away the herniation, he's going to stop smelling hamburgers. All right, neospinothalamic axons, we said as well. And there's this weird little, one of those many weird little studies that they find out there, and they say, oh, left-handers do this, and homosexuals do that, and men do this, and girls do that, and Indians do this, and white people do that. And so, somebody suggests that there is a difference in the size of the anterior commissure depending on gender and sexual orientation. Okay, what does that mean? So the anterior commissure might be bigger in, I'm not even sure which group it is. So is that saying perhaps that heterosexuals smell better? Or homosexuals have more neospinothalamic? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I wonder how they got that that study funded. Because it doesn't tell us anything in the end, just a weird one. So for our purposes, the anterior commissure is just the anterior commissure, and it does not indicate whether or not you may have a sexual preference. How does smell work? The good kind of smell, not the Tom Last email kind of smell there. All right. Simple, right? The chemical, the odorant molecule dissolves in the mucus, and then it's just a chemical reaction at that point. Your sensitivity to smell is far better than taste, right? You've got dozens of smell receptors. You've only got 4 or 5 kind of thing for taste. So basically there's a code, right? If you got 25 receptors, a rose is 4, 8, and 6, and whatever, and that's, there you go. So why is it, as we'll talk about later, right, smell contributes contributes a lot to the taste of food. Why? Because smell is much more accurate. That's it. So when you have a cold and your nose is blocked, the food doesn't taste as good. That's the reason why. So actually about 75% of your perception of taste comes from your nose. All right. So another very important thing to know, how many of you guys are familiar with Toucan Sam? Toucan Sam, that's the big bird for the Fruit Loops. And what does he always do? He follows his nose, right? So it shows the little animated odor, and what does he start to? Well, think about it, right? Smell is for localizing. Okay, I smell meat, immediately my nose desensitizes, so what am I doing? I'm looking for higher concentrations of the smell, and it leads me right to it. If it's a dangerous smell, I'm going to keep backing away until it doesn't register at all anymore, right? So that's the reason food desensitizes or smell desensitizes fast, so that you seek out the location. You find the food. Makes sense, doesn't it? It also is why you should always go around your plate. Now, there's always one or two people in the room that eat their broccoli first, then their meat, then whatever else. So who is it? Just confess it. Alrighty. Don't do that. Because when you go around the plate, everything tastes better. You ever not been to one of these like super fancy 8-course meals where course number 5 is a single grape? Because that cleanses your palate, and then you move on to the next choice of food, right? Absolutely. So if you're really going to go out and spend all that money somewhere on a lobster, bite a lobster, sip of water, bite a lobster, sip of water, you will get much more money's worth out of it. Are you out there on that? And the best kind of lobster is what kind of lobster? The one you killed yourself. Yes. All right, plus Thanksgiving coming up. That's the one time all Canadians pretend to be American. What do we need to consider for olfaction clinical notes? Well, we know the obvious one, getting smacked in the head, trauma, anosmia. Okay, no problem there. We talked about the hallucination thing, right? The hippocampal area, the uncus of the temporal lobe, the uncal herniation, the transtentorial. And there's an actual condition down here called Foster-Kennedy syndrome. What is a meningioma? It's a tumor off the meninges. But look back at the picture here for a sec, right, when we look at the bottom. Well, any picture's good here. That Foster-Kennedy meningioma is going to be growing right in here. Okay, think about what's underneath the brain, right? The olfactory nerves and the meninges. So that Foster-Kennedy is a frontal lobe tumor that will start to compress, at least for starters, the olfactory tract. So when we go look at Foster-Kennedy, what have I got for symptoms? I see ipsilateral anosmia. This makes sense, right? Let's assume that our tumor's on the left side so we can write something to go down with the slide. He will lose smell from the left side of his nose. Ipsilateral anosmia. Everybody okay with that? Compression of the left olfactory nerve. It says optic atrophy. Now if I press on cranial nerve 2 on this side, my optic nerve is going to atrophy. So that's also ipsilateral. Makes total sense so far, right? Tumor on the left, effect 1 and 2 on the left. But then it says contralateral papilledema. Well, first of all, what's papilledema? Swelling of the optic disc because of intracranial pressure, typically, right? Hydrocephalus, bleed, whatever kind of thing. So you take your ophthalmoscope, you look into the eye, and you see the distortion of the 2 discs. But watch me for a sec, right? Our tumor's here. Left side optic atrophy, left side anosmia. But I only got papilledema here. Why? Because this eye has optic atrophy and you can't see the papilledema in that eye. It just won't manifest. So I only see the papilledema contralateral because that's the only eye that's normal to show the symptom. My optic nerve is atrophied, it just won't show papilledema. So, ipsilateral olfactory tract, or left-sided, damage to left cranial nerve 1. Optic atrophy on the left cranial nerve 2. And pressure on both sides only shows up contralaterally. left with on that one? That's an interesting little case there. Jonathan, you're going to join us here in lecture time? Awesome. Synesthesia is one of my all-time favorites. Okay? Anosmia means no sense of smell. Could you have hyper or hypoosmia? Sure. Increased or decreased sensitivity, no problem there. But in conditioner and synesthesia, you switch either within the same modality or between them. So roses smell like garbage, that kind of thing, right? Or you would actually perceive a color as a sound. All right, the best story on that one is that actually I might even give this article here. Let's see if we can make my video work. Now there's two possibilities for this. Otherwise you were born with it, which means you might not know it right away, or you got bonked on the head, which I will tell you about in a second. Stop downloading stuff.
Synesthesia to me is a true definition of the mixing of the senses. The word synesthesia itself in Greek doesn't mean that, it means joint or mixed senses. In my particular case, whenever I hear a sound, I get an immediate and an involuntary taste on my tongue. So it's one sense mixing with another. When I was a child, although I used to taste words and taste sound all the time, it just seemed so natural to me. It was as natural as breathing, if you like. It certainly didn't cause me any discomfort. It didn't make me stick out. So I just got on with things. While at school, for example, I used to choose friends on the strength of the niceness of the taste of their names. And this is something that's carried on. It carried on into adulthood. It carries on now. I used to choose girlfriends principally on the taste of their name. We had nothing to do with personality. We had very little to do with looks. It was simply the taste of their name.
I'm just picturing some guy saying, wow, your name tastes good. He's never getting a date his entire life. So this guy, auditory, at some perceptual level, got crossed with taste perception. So he hears whatever name as a response to it.
What about when he actually tastes something? Can he actually taste?
Oh, I mean, yeah, as far as they can tell, like he will consider strawberries to be sweet and, you know, like a rhubarb to be tart, that kind of thing. Yeah, there's no discrepancies in his ability to taste tastes. He just tends to hear things. It promotes that kind of the other add-on here is the one I think I mentioned, the kid that talks about how he realized there was something going on because he would tell his friends about the red-sounding guitar chord or the brown-sounding, you know, number. And you're like, what do you mean red chord? Is it a D or a B or whatever? You know, it's red. Because when he heard that chord, he would see red. So if it's congenital, like this guy said, I mean, how would he know that he was different? He just assumed everybody tasted names, kind of thing. You know?
So if he was to go to like a symphony and hear a whole bunch of different sounds, I mean, he just...
It would be like an all-you-can-eat buffet. And classical music was what did it for him. It might be opera or heavy metal. Well, imagine that guy going to, you know, like serious goth punk heavy metal because that's what did it for him. Yeah, so there's a lot more to that guy, as you can imagine. Here's an example, right, of number 5 and 2. To you and me, we got to go picking those things out. Some people would see different shapes as different colors. That's just an example of how that would appear out, right? And this is the thing I was mentioning before about the guy with the red-sounding guitar. All right? For those of you that may have been in Manhattan over Easter, you ever been to Macy's at Easter in Manhattan? Okay, at they just fill the thing up with flowers, right? It's just you walk into the first, it was a gigantic store, and you walk in and there's just flowers everywhere. It's incredible. So, a couple of friends of mine were heading across town to hit these outdoor courts they hit for volleyball, and this guy who had a car accident a couple of months ago, he's with us, and it starts to rain, so we're going to cut through Macy, right? The thing's 9 blocks long, whatever, you can cut through it on 9 blocks. But we get 2 feet in the door, and he's gagging like he's ready to throw up. He's having a horrible time with this, and to the point where he's like, guys, I'm not kidding, I'm going to throw up in the store. So we ran out a side door and ended up in an alley, and the reason the alley was bad is because it was August and there was a garbage strike. So the alley was filled with garbage and rotting garbage, and me and the other guy doubled over gagging, and the third guy's, oh God, that's so much better. Oh. And he's gagging to the smell of roses and tulips, but he's ready to embrace and live in that garbage for the rest of his life. What do you think his apartment looked like? Now think about it, think about it. I don't know, I mean, if it smelled dirty, you would clean. And then it would smell worse, right? So then he would use more Febreze, and it would smell even worse. And he was getting into his ducts, right? The air vents and stuff, trying to clean those out. You know that commercial where it's so clean it goes ding? That was his place, okay? Because he kept cleaning. Because every time he cleaned, it got worse. He figured he must be missing something. Then he was convinced the janitor put a rat in the vent and all this kind of stuff.